last week, somebody posted a comment in response to one of my videos talking about biblical violence, where they said they conceded or they agreed that I had made some substantive points in critiquing Paul Copan's understanding of biblical violence. But that what they were doing is asking, is it possible that one could find a way out by way of skeptical theism? So what is skeptical theism? Well, skeptical theism is an approach to the problem of evil and suffering in the world, where it says that, of course, first of all, let's set up the question. So if God is perfectly good and all-powerful, God would not want evil in the world, presumably, and yet there's a lot of evil in the world. Why is that? Why does God allow evil? And the skeptical theist response, there are, of course, many other different types of responses, but in the skeptical theist response, what one says is, even if we cannot identify a good reason why God would allow evil in the world, it's not sufficient grounds to think that God does not have such a reason, because we as limited, finite creatures should not assume that we have access to the reasons why God would allow evil. So the implication then of skeptical theism is that God could have all sorts of reasons that we can't even imagine as to why he would allow evil. The skeptical theism then is a chastening of our reasoning and our moral knowledge to say maybe we don't know as much as we think we know about these issues. So now you apply that to the issue of biblical violence, and it becomes like this. Well, if we are these finite, limited, fallible knowers, then perhaps there is just no contradiction with God doing something like commanding genocidal violence. It just looks like there is a problem there because we are finite knowers and we don't have access to all the reasons that God has for commanding and commending particular behaviors that we would otherwise think of as moral atrocities. That's the skeptical theist appeal here. So could somebody like Paul Copan, whose view, as I've argued, implies and entails that God commanded and commended the killing of civilians, including women and children and the physically and mentally handicapped, infants, the elderly, and so on, killing, hacking apart those people with swords and impaling them with spears. The fact that that appears to us to be morally problematic, perhaps that's just another example of our cognitive limitations, qua skeptical theism. Is that a satisfactory response? I mean, one could argue that, one can take that position. But what I always like to point out is that something like skeptical theism does exact a cost. It's kind of like a payday loan when you're out of money, and so you get, let's say, a cash advance on your next check or something, and so you immediately get your check cashed and you get the money, but the charge is a very high cost of interest that the payday lender is charging you. So you can do that in a pinch, but the more that you appeal to payday loans, the higher the cost extracted from those loans. So it's not a way to do your general financial planning. Similarly, I would say that there is a high cost that is incurred when one appeals to skeptical theism, particularly without any qualification, as I think would be happening in this case. It exacts a high cost, and so the question is really, are you satisfied with the high cost extracted by the appeal to skeptical theism? In this case, the high cost is saying you think that it is morally problematic to kill civilians, to stab and hack into pieces infants and small children and women and the physically, mentally handicapped and the infirm and the elderly. But in fact, maybe it's not. Sometimes if God commands that or commends it, then it's just a good thing to do. My question is, first of all, consider the implications that that has for all knowledge. If it is the case that I am wrong, that it is immoral to hack apart or to bludgeon an infant, then what else am I wrong about in terms of morality? It would seem to me, see, here's my problem, is that among the most certain, among the things of which I'm most certain when it comes to morality is that it is wrong to hack apart an infant. So if I am in fact incorrect about that, and it is not intrinsically morally wrong to hack apart an infant, then it raises the question of what else am I wrong about? If I can be wrong about something so fundamental in my moral structure of belief, my noetic structure, then what else can I be wrong about? And that is the cost that you incur by appealing to skeptical theism. It is skeptical indeed, because I think what it does ultimately is undermine our confidence in the deliverances of our moral perceptual faculties in a pretty sweeping way. That I really can't have confidence in any of the things that I now believe I'm most certain about. Is rape wrong? Right? Is child sacrifice wrong, like intrinsically wrong? Is incest wrong? All of the things is cannibalism wrong? Right? All of the things that we assume, yeah, that's intrinsically wrong. You should never do that. Now these are called into question, because if God can have morally sufficient reasons to command the genocidal slaughter of civilian populations, then what else can God have morally sufficient reasons to command? And at that point, all bets are off, because you really don't have any confidence in the deliverances of your moral perceptual faculties. What we have to do then, I would submit at this point, is to take a step back and to weigh two different claims. The one claim, on the one side of the scale, is that God did in fact command the killing of these civilian populations. And on the other side of the scale is that it is intrinsically wrong to kill infants, etc. And I would say that when I weigh those two options, the claim that it is that it is intrinsically wrong to kill, butcher infants and all these other denizens of civilian populations, that clearly has a stronger weight for me than the position that I have to in fact believe that God did in fact command this. So for me, the epistemic strength of that claim simply overwhelms the other claim that God in fact commanded this. And that forces me back to say, you know what, I have to find another way to read this text. I have to find another way to read and to think about Joshua and what God is doing in including this text within canon. And that brings me, in my book, Jesus Loves Canaanites, to exploring these different options, such as spiritualizations, such as a contemporary spiritualization or an ancient allegorization, and other models such as providential errancy, and combining perhaps those different approaches in a way that doesn't require me to go to the payday lender and get the loan to maintain a particular reading of the text, which exacts an enormous cost upon my moral perceptual faculties. In fact, one that has, as I've argued, this absolutely debilitating skeptical implication. So to conclude, I would not appeal to skeptical theism as a way to continue to justify something like Paul Copan's reading of the biblical text. I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's justified.